Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. We got a new promo card for the month of September. Sorry that we haven't had any videos up in a little while. Things have been a little bit on fire, and I mean that quite literally. But yeah, it's been like a little bit nuts. We have been streaming again starting this week and have been really enjoying ourselves with Eternal and a bunch of other stuff. We also put up some Among Us gameplay and some other interesting things on the channel, and we're looking to do a little more variety streaming as well as more Eternal stuff because really enjoying just streaming and doing lots of different projects right now. But today we're going to be talking about the new promo, Deleph's Awakening, which of course for the next week is a free card that you can get by playing and winning a single game of Eternal once per day. So you can get up to 4 copies of it, and if you don't have this card when the week is over, you can still purchase copies of it for relatively cheap prices because promo cards are pretty cheap to craft. But yes, anyways, Deleph's Awakening is a 1-cost Xenon card that says create a copy of each card in your deck with a different name and shuffle them into your deck, then draw a card for every 10 cards in your void. So lots to unpack here to be sure. Also just like a very unusual card in design and circumstance. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of stuff this card does. First things first, notably not voidbound, which is interesting because it is a card that does have some voidbound shenanigans going on. It is also a card that creates copies of itself, which is fairly notable. It creates a copy of each card in your deck with a different name. So that's basically anything that you currently have a copy of, you will get an extra copy of it in your deck. If you're running a bunch of 1-ofs, you'll get 2 of every single 1-of. You'll basically double the size of your deck. If you're running a bunch of 4-ofs, then you'll get 5 of every 4-of, which is useful if you want to have 5 of a particular copy of a card in your deck. Combined with cards like the 0-1 Messenger Hawk that allows you to put 4 copies of a card in your deck, this is a way to get a lot of copies of a particular card into your deck while sort of slowly figuring out some ways to cycle out the rest of them. The second bit of text is what makes the card a little bit more interesting. You then draw a card for every 10 cards in your void. So if you have a bunch of cards in your void, you get to basically just draw a wild amount of cards. 20 cards means this is a draw 2 for 1, which at that point is probably where Deleph's Awakening starts to pick up a little bit of value. Basically, on its own, if you're playing in a self-mill archetype and you manage to mill 20 of your own cards into your deck, Deleph's Awakening then becomes a pretty useful card because it creates some extra copies, which is actually not a good thing. It increases the size of your deck, but it does increase the size of your deck in a commensurate way such that you are not necessarily affecting your odds of drawing particular cards, and then it draws you 2 cards, which is a particularly interesting and useful thing. I think the central thing is that Deleph's Awakening does appear to create copies of itself, so if you have a deck that's very, very small, you can potentially get a lot of Deleph's Awakenings and a lot of other cards that are like your particular thing. If you have like a 60 card void and 10 cards and you know what the bottom 2 cards are, you can start creating copies of Deleph's Awakening and then creating copies of those cards, and then just drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing as your deck expands and expands and expands. This gets kind of weird in a way that feels like it would break the client at that point. So there's obviously some interesting sort of aspects to it in that respect. I think that the card best belongs in a Xenon archetype. Well, obviously Xenon, but in particular in an Invoke the Waystones type archetype. If you've seen some of our previous brews along these lines, like Invocation Impossible, you have a slight idea of what we're talking about. Using Invoke the Waystones allows you to pitch a number of different cards while also basically just decreasing the size of your deck to get card advantage. And if you follow that up with Deleph's Awakening, you'll have a lot of more cards in your void, but you'll also be creating extra copies of cards that you might need, such as Lumen Reclaimer, and you'll be getting access to more cards that you might need at a fairly cheap additional price. So combine that with Azindel the Wayfinder to get a bunch of extra power when all of these cards go into your void. You have a deck that actually can use Deleph's Awakening and get some benefit out of it. This is clearly not a terribly strong card. I would say that while it has the potential to create broken combos due to its ability to duplicate itself, it is very likely only going to be a combo piece and potentially a value card in decks that have a significant amount of self-mill. But for the most part, this card is probably just going to cantrip itself in certain mill decks, which It's a reasonable way to get through some of your cards and try and like thin out your deck a little bit if you have a lot of power to spare. Mostly it's just going to be a little bit unseemly, and like it's a D tier power card. It's not going to do anything crazy unless you have a very specific deck to take advantage of it. That being said, it is an unusual Johnny card, it is a puzzle to solve, and I look forward to seeing what people's solutions to this puzzle are. I've already suggested mine, but if you have any particular ones that you want to put out, go ahead and put them in the comments below, because I think this card is weird enough to merit multiple different potential types of decks. Yeah, so definitely the potential for self-duplication has some really interesting side effects. As always, I'm really happy that Eternal has this much tolerance for shenanigans in its game. Like, these are things that you can't really do in physical card games all that much. This is like really unique digital card game space, and as a result, it's something that we really haven't seen before. And I think that's really relevant in terms of like what kind of stuff we want to be doing. But yeah, it makes your deck larger, but not in a way that's necessarily bad. It reduces the amount of power in your deck because you have basically less unique power than most other unique cards, although if you're playing a wide variety of different power cards, then that is not necessarily true. But you can sort of mess around with the stats and ratios of your own deck by using Deleph's Awakening to get around power requirements. So for example, if you want to just draw more and more gas and you're running literally just like time sigils and shadow sigils, then like this will increase the size of all of your relevant non-power cards by 1, and only increase the size of your power cards by 2, because you'll get the shadow symbol and the time symbol. So yeah, you can basically increase the amount of extra value in your deck, and like that's something interesting that kind of comes out of this sort of weird value proposition that Deleph's Awakening is offering. Obviously, yeah, not a strong card, but definitely has like some weird potential. There's a lot of different things to consider about this card. You want to consider the duplication, you want to consider whether or not like it's useful at all to have 5 copies of a card in your deck or 6 copies of a card in your deck, or like with Deleph's Awakening you can actually play many copies of the same card, and if there's any particular way that you can actually like get that to go off, then that's a interesting option. For example, like you could do Time, Shadow, Primal, build a Rain of Frogs deck, and just like Rain of Frogs your opponent over and over again. Wouldn't go off consistently, but you know, like that kind of like weird trolly nonsense is definitely sort of the territory where Deleph's Awakening resides. Yeah, you know, there's a lot of other things that you can play around with. Someone is suggesting Waylay to steal people's voids and help activate Deleph's Awakening. I think there's just like many unusual choices. Static Bolt, really good choice. Yeah, we have a lot of interesting different ways to implement this card. In none of those situations is the card necessarily going to be broken unless there are a significant amount of things that go right for it. You have to have basically all of the things going correctly for it, both a way to easily utilize Deleph's ability and a way to easily put cards into your void. And if you can do both those things, then yeah, this card's got some interesting potential. Story-wise, this card has some relation to Khosrow Deleph, the character who has been introduced in some of the latest stuff. So if you want to check that out, that's the Awakening campaign. It's interesting to see this sort of transformation, but I don't really know anything about Deleph as a character for the most part, so this is overall like just kind of like medium on lore as far as things go. At some point, Deleph might end up being a bit more important to the story, and that certainly appears to be where things are going, but we'll find out more about that as it goes along. All right, so that's Deleph's Awakening. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I am on Twitch, YouTube, Patreon, and Twitter, and we are going to be streaming Monday, Tuesday, probably Thursday and Friday every week. So you'll see you there at 7 PST. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, you can subscribe, ring the bell at the bottom, all of the good things to support the stream and the YouTube, and I will see you all next time. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers.